Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here with us today. We have some very special programming. Today's panel discussion, titled What Draws an Artist to Glassmaking and the Challenges and Victories Along the Way, coincides with our Invitational Glass Show that was curated by Shelley Muslowski-Allen. This very special show features an outstanding roster of artists. Participating artists includes April Sargent. Are you there, April?
Hi.
Christina Bothwell. Kathy Thompson.
Hi.
Dean Allison.
Hello, everyone.
Mark Petrovic.
Hello.
Kari Russell Poole.
Hello.
Kathleen Elliott.
Right here. Hi, everybody.
Sabrina Knowles.
Hello.
Jenny Pullman.
Happy day.
Susan Taylor Glasgow.
Hi, good evening.
Sibylla Peretti.
Hello.
Jason Chakravarty is here with us on the panel today. Jason.
Howdy.
Suzanne Head.
Hi, everybody.
Tina Offiero.
Hi, everybody.
Carmen Lozar.
Hey, everybody. How are you?
Dan Clayman.
Hey, everybody.
Great. So that's it for our participating artists. Each of these artists brings a unique perspective to this show and also to today's panel discussion. So we are in for a treat. I'd like to just take a few moments to acknowledge Shelley Muslowski-Allen for her hand in curating this beautiful exhibition. Without her,
Hey, Shelly.
Without her careful selections and insights, we would not be here today. So Shelley, thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Denise. Thank you to the gallery, to Blue Rain Gallery, for this wonderful opportunity. I'm extremely grateful for your representation and ongoing friendship. I've been working with you for at least 12 years now. I think that's about right. You guys work so hard. I've seen you day and night setting up shows. I really appreciate the great respect that you bring to your gallery, to your artists, the support you have within your community and for your local artists. I think the gallery just looks amazing with all this glass in it. The medium of glass is relatively new to the art world for any newcomers to the idea of glass as artwork. The studio glass movement in the US arose almost 60 years ago with its focus on the making of one-of-a-kind objects through the simple sharing of technical knowledge and ideas amongst artists. The artists in this show are the pioneers of these techniques, and they continue to push beyond their given boundaries. Glass can be super demanding and volatile. Time in the studio can move so slowly, and your knowledge gained in the studio is mostly through trial and error. This knowledge is nuanced and becomes known to the artists sometimes only through other senses, as in touch or smell or sight. It's really hard to verbalize the knowledge that all these artists have. In order to rise to the level of mastery in these artworks exhibited, these artists have dedicated their lives to this work. They know the properties of glass so intimately that their work is not just about materiality. They're not afraid to mix mediums, embrace failures, and persevere with their ideas. These artists are explorers, they're educators, they're great observers and storytellers. Their work celebrates and inspires the human spirit. It truly is an honor to share the work of these artists I so deeply admire. Thank you, all of you artists, for participating in this show and sharing your expansive experience and insight. And I want to thank you too, to the audience, the art enthusiasts, the collectors and fellow artists for being here today, for completing this circle and supporting and celebrating all of these artists and Blue Rain Gallery in this special exhibition. I'm going to pass it back to you, Denise, now to start with your moderation. Thank you.
So today's panel is titled, What Draws an Artist to Glassmaking and the Challenges and Victories Along the Way. There's a lot to discuss under that umbrella. And the first thing that I would like to talk about is light. So I have often heard the term the fourth dimension used as a way to describe the power of light and its effects on glass. What does that mean to you and your work? Is light an important element for what you are creating? Maybe we can go to Cappy Thompson, and Cappy, would you like to start this?
Sure. I'm probably not alone in being attracted to light, and I'm sure everybody in the room. Light is. I started working in stained glass, and it's driven by light, and so I basically came to see that glass has the capacity to basically give you a direct experience of color. It's not a reflected color, it's actually a transmitted color. So you actually have a physical experience of the work. So that's, I guess, a starting place. It's and I've been basically working with glass for more than 40 years now, and I would say that that's probably the most mysterious and compelling part of it for me. So, and I'd like to hear, I don't want to talk on much about it, but I'd love to hear what other people think about it as well.
Thank you, Cappy. I know that light plays a role in many people's works that are included in the panel today. Someone else that stands out for me is Christina Bothwell. Light plays a large role in your work. Christina, would you maybe like to address the audience today about light and that dimension?
I would love to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Well, for me, I've always been drawn to the ineffable, the kind of the meaning that lies beneath the appearance of things. And so in the one sense, glass is solid and heavy, but when it's illuminated, it just becomes transparent and fluid looking. And so these two opposing qualities make glass for me an ideal vehicle to express the balance of life and spirit. And in my work, I like to explore the idea that we're much more than just our physical bodies. So to me, the fourth dimension is the non-physical, that kind of infinite quality of our spirit, and glass helps me to express that better than any other medium.
Thank you. That's a really wonderful perspective. Would anybody like to add to that? Tina?
Yeah, I think the work that's in the gallery right now is particularly about light, and light isn't always in my work. A lot of times it's just the form that I'm more interested in. But these pieces, the more I thought about this question, the more it made sense about what was going on in the work in the gallery. This work is inspired by the sky and water, and my experience and my time with being out in the water, and I think glass. I think that's why I chose the clear, transparent blue glass, because I wanted to imbue what I was trying to talk about in that sort of vastness of space into the pieces a little bit. And so very much so glass and color, the color what it transmits is very much about light. And even I think the time plays into it in some ways in just how, in my own experience with light. and what I chose to do and how I made my decisions for the pieces, to try to recapture a feeling that I might have had with water or with the sky. So that's, yeah, it really resonates for me. And I hadn't quite really thought about that yet in that way, because I always think of sculpture and form. And I took it for granted, I think, until this question came up. Yeah.
That's interesting, because it seems like light would have just naturally occurred to you, especially since your pieces have that very translucent quality to them, and they seem to really just come alive in light.
Yeah.
Dan.
Hi, hi all. I kind of come at this differently. I mean, we all look at it and we look at the work in the show, but glass in general of this opaque and transparent and magnifying and lens and all that stuff. But I've come, like the objects in the show are 3 small objects and by nature are kind of nostalgic. Because it's got copper that's patinaed, or that blue piece shifted axis looks a little bit like a Victrola thing. And so there's all this kind of, I guess nostalgic is the best way. But in my installation work that I'm kind of every once in a while able to do, the light itself is the trigger for nostalgia, and all the machinations I use to make the pieces are much more about the light being the trigger for nostalgia as opposed to the object itself.
Thank you, Dan.
Yep.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to add to that? Does anyone have a similar perspective or a different perspective that they'd like to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, one of the things that first drew me to working with glass was its ability to hold light and to kind of manipulate light in a different way that other materials aren't really conducive to doing. So like glass can hold light or reflect light, refract light, and transmit it. And so working with, in a way, when you work with glass, it almost feels like you're sculpting with light. And there's obviously some artists that do that in their own work, but I think that's one of the neat qualities about glass that I love so much. That's all.
Thank you. Thank you. If I could maybe just call someone else out to answer or address this question. Dean Allison, I know that your work, because it's not always just glass, you use other materials and you don't necessarily play off the translucency of glass, at least not so obviously. Is there anything that maybe you want to say about that? Your choices to do that, why that is?
Sure. I think what's really important to me in life is people. And so that's mainly what my work's about. And I kind of try to choose, a lot of my models are people that are close to me, family members and community members, neighbors, people that might be somebody I interact with. So I'm looking for a particular aspect of light in their personality, in their mannerism, and I guess that's something that I try to capture. As far as glass, glass has so many characteristics that are similar to the human condition that I just try to use all its qualities, and light hopefully comes from that. So.
Thank you. So my next question for you all has to do with the expressiveness of glass. How does glass as a medium lend itself to expression and interpretation in ways that other mediums might not be successful? What are some of the limitations for expression with glass that you have experienced with your own work? Perhaps we can start with Susan Taylor Glasgow on this one. Susan, would you like to address this question for us?
Thank you. Yeah, my work has a lot to do with the emotions that I had as a young woman growing up, and kind of the mixed messages that I got, because I'm a product of the 50s, And at the time, you learned how to sew and you learned how to cook and you learned how to type just in case you needed something to fall back on. So a lot of my work has to do with the dichotomy of women's roles in the household. And I like using glass because it has such a seductive nature to it. However, it's an unyielding material. So I make feminine forms that I hope are beautiful to draw the viewer in so that they can explore the subtleties of the object and relate to their own experiences.
Are there any real limitations that you experience working with glass in your work? Or it seems as though your pieces are so incredibly engineered and you're using multimedia to make them. So, I mean, it seems as though you really don't have limitations.
I so connected with Shelley's comment about artists learning through trial and error. And I love building things and I love engineering things. So that aspect of it, while frustrating, is really a part of the growth of the piece.
Thank you. Maybe Suzanne, would you like to add anything to this? The expressiveness of glass?
Sure. So I come from an illustration and painting background. So when I started working with glass, it really pushed me outside of my comfort zone in that I had to not only consider the image, but the actual object in space. With an illustration, I can kind of just ask the viewer to lose themselves within the story being told and ignore the rectangle. It's kind of similar to the way they might ignore the physicality of a book when they lose themselves in a novel. But the physicality of glass is so assertive that even if I create a narrative on a flat piece of glass, its presence within space just cannot be ignored. So with glass, I have to constantly ask myself, how can I make a sophisticated object within space? And how can the work acknowledge its own physicality while still allowing the viewer to be taken elsewhere with the imagery? So, I mean, there's plenty of technical limitations I could talk about versus just drawing and painting. I mean, glass is so much more difficult, but I think the conceptual, not necessarily limitation, but just question that I'm forced to ask that I didn't previously have to ask myself is the most interesting.
Thank you, Suzanne. Would anybody else like to add say something about the expressiveness of glass or the limitations that they experience?
Yeah, sure. So I think that expressiveness wise, like everything that I'll use the term we, because it seems like every time that move down a path, starting a piece, it involves Jennifer. And so Jennifer and I are both kind of tight at the hip when ideas come together, but they're very responsive and narrative driven. And so we see like our, it becomes like a chess match or a game trying to figure out which process or technique to use to truly express or to represent that response that we're having. And so I think that glass lends itself perfectly to that, because it's kind of, we talk about it all the time, that glass is the only material that can do everything for us. And it started for me with being able to actually capture light in it. And now it's turned into, it's just the most versatile type of material to work with. I think our limitations, or the things that slow us down, often are just maybe our physical studio spaces maybe limit us. And then I would definitely go back to what both Susan and Shelley said, which is trial and error. Like our limitations comes back to maybe we start with an idea and it totally takes a completely different route because of the outcome that we get along the way, and it just grows or morphs into something else. So that's what we find with our limitations, is just more of a, you thought you were close to the finish line, and yet maybe one step took you 6 months back, or it just needed to be set down for a second. So
you have to be very adaptable.
Yep, exactly.
Susan, did you want to say something else?
Listening to Jason, it reminded me that one of the things that attracted me to glass is it reminded me of fabric and its translucency and the ability to shape it and form it. And I'd forgotten about that until I listened to Jason talk about the properties of glass.
Thank you, Susan. Jenny, did you want to add something?
Thank you. Yes, I'd just like to add in reference to the first of those two questions, how does the medium lend itself to interpretation in the ways that other mediums may not? Most of the sculptural work that Sabrina and I do in glass focus on the use of curvature to create our forms. And having worked with other materials, including wood and steel, I find that the natural propensity of the material to be rounded and curved, and the fact that it's in motion in the hot shop allows you to capture a curve in a way that carving a block of wood for hours, you wouldn't have the same kind of spontaneous freezing of a material in motion.
Thank you, Jenny. Is there something about the physicality of glass that lured you in? How do you keep up with the physical demands of working with the medium?
Jenny touched on a few things that were really important to me as far as going into the hot shop and directing me in a way of thought and also what I wanted to do with the material. And it is that fluidity and that curvature that Jenny was talking about. For me, going into a hot shop, whether you're going to sculpt or blow, you automatically have a three-dimensional object rather than a two-dimensional object trying to put together to make a three-dimensional object. And in that way, the physicality of glass being three-dimensional from the get-go in the hot shop is what I found inspiring and helped drive me in my way. And that also relates back to, because of that curvature and that being able to manipulate the glass, can also go back to question number 2 in that expression. For instance, in our homage series, our intent is to put forth a feeling of reverence, and simply by bending the shoulders and bowing the head, you've got that, and it's just comes so naturally in working the glass. And as far as physically keeping up with it, I'm not doing such a great job these days, but because you have to stay active and maintain a certain amount of strength in order to work in the hot shop.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a challenge.
Yeah,
oh, Jenny just whispered in my ear, and to remind me to speak to the feminine nature of glass. For us, it's very feminine, it's soft, and it's strong, and I could go on and on and on, but there's that quality too that we both like working with.
And I definitely see that in your work. There is a very strong feminine quality in the work that you produce. And my hat goes off to all of you too, for being able to manage the physicality of glass, because that's something that struck me very early on about it. Having the opportunity, to visit a hot shop and get close to the heat and just, what you put up with, the physical demands of the medium, it's a lot. So my hat goes off to all of you. Maybe we can throw this question to Kari Russell-Poole. Kari, would you maybe like to add something to the physicality of glass?
Sure. So I was attracted to the physicality of glass blowing to begin with, And one of the things that I loved about glass was that you could have a three-dimensional object, and when you were finished, it was formed, but also the coloring took place while you were making it. So that there wasn't any, I was making something and then deciding how to finish it. It was just sort of happening as it went. And then I would say that the physicality of glassblowing is what drove me to the torch, was that I didn't love being hot, and I'm not particularly strong. And so using the torch and making smaller elements and joining them together really allows me to make larger structures that I feel my work is kind of the kind of work that people can't touch, but when I'm making it, it's so very physical. I'm up in all the spaces and I'm touching everything and all in and around. So when I'm making it, it's all about space and I'm really reacting to it. And then it's this weird dichotomy that when it's finished, people are like, ooh, I can't go near it. And I spend so much time with it, around it, and touching it that I sometimes am out of touch with that reaction that other people have.
It is incredible that you can take these small pieces and build them up to be this one great large piece. And, you know, as far as physicality goes too, level of dexterity and nimbleness that you have to work with something or little pieces on that scale, you know, that says a lot as well. Dan, are you raising your hand?
I am. I've got just a quick comment. Besides dexterity, skill, artistic ambition, everything, everybody on this panel, you got to schlep a lot. You got to move stuff here, move stuff there, pick it up, throw it in the furnace, throw it in the crate, get it to the place, get it back. So need I go on?
No, those are real demands.
Yeah, it's all day long.
Thank you, Dan. Would anybody else like to say anything about the physicality of glass before we move on to the next? Tina.
Yeah, I can, Carrie, I can really relate to some of the things you said about the color coming through it, and but that was not that exactly. And then for me, whether it was casting or whether it's blowing, I'm really attracted to, one, being on my feet and being active, but there's something about the physicalness of form that I get right away. I move towards repetition, and then it's through the physical forms that seem to add up that sometimes send me on my way to figure out exactly what the pieces I'm going to make. I had expressed this earlier to Denise that I don't always know where I'm going when I get started, but there's a form in my brain that I want to repeat or see. And then I usually make them slowly and let them sit around and then add them up. And then that sort of tells me what to make, so that it's very physical for me about that. And then in terms of the technical making, I'm a terrible glass blower, so I completely depend on others to do that for me. I can't really do it. I'm just terrible at it. Where casting, I can work much more independently. So I do struggle with my own inability to physically blow the forms that I want. And I have to work with other people.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a perfect segue to our next question. Utilizing a team to make glass sculpture versus being a solo practitioner. So oftentimes we think of artists as being solitary people, creating work in the seclusion of their studios, like painters, for instance. Do you have to be a social creature to be successful as a glass blower, given that you need a team to do it? How much do you have to fight your nature to do this? For those of you who have a solitary method for creating your artwork with glass, how much of that was defined by your nature and how much of that was defined by what you wanted to create? So I would like to first give April Sargent the floor with this question. April, would you like to share anything with the audience?
Sure, yeah, I started off as a glass blower as a teenager, so I really got a feel for that teamwork and the kind of dance that happens in the hot shop. And since I've been engraving, I stopped blowing glass in I think 2003. So I've been solidly working as an engraver for a while now, but I find that I miss a lot of that teamwork and interaction with people. I live and work in the same studios. I live and work in the same space. So when I'm engraving a lot and just spending countless hours by myself, I can definitely feel the kind of antisocial aspect of engraving. But I do also tend to be an introvert, so it really suits my personality. And I've often thought about if I had continued on being a glassblower, how well that would suit me and my kind of natural inclinations. But I have also recently, or I guess not so recently, but over the last 10 years, I've really found that seclusion is a balance for me in my practice. So I've taken to doing a lot of research outside of the studio and kind of collaborating with other people, whether it's scientists in the field or other artists, but really trying to have some sort of connection with other people. So I'm not totally isolated in my own little studio and world. So trying to keep a balance between my work, my studio work and the outside world has been something that I found challenging, but also very rewarding. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
Thank you, April. Anyone else? Maybe Mark Petrovic, would you like to speak to
Sure.
being a part of a team versus being a solo practitioner?
Yeah, well, in this time of COVID, I think it's definitely beneficial to not be working with a team. We worked in Connecticut for over 20 years, and while we were there wasn't a lot of other people to get to assist, so we kind of were self-imposed to work by ourselves. I find that it's very difficult to keep a team occupied and keep them busy. I think it's very easy to let the work get ahead of the ideas when you're working with a team. And I had a hard time managing a team and then, focusing on the conceptual side of things. So I think idea generation, ideation happens best when I'm by myself. I'm by myself in the studio. No one's watching me do stupid things and experiment and play. And that, I think the better components come from, free association, just kind of working with the material. And then being forced to work by ourselves, largely by not having a big community around us, it forced us to develop equipment and build our own equipment that we could use to take the place of people. And through that, we were able to kind of develop some work that was very specialized, that depended on the equipment that was driven by the idea, but then the equipment was made to create the objects that were required for the idea at hand. So I think they both have pros and cons, but I think working by ourselves, especially in this time of COVID, has been beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. So you've actually had to develop your own equipment.
Yeah, we built all of our equipment. We have a couple kilns that are commercial kilns, but there's a couple things I could be more specific, like normally in a studio, the doors on the glory hole open up like barn doors, and we developed doors that roll to the side. So I don't need to pay someone to stand there and open my doors for me. And then I can go, and when I'm reheating, I can close the door with the pipe in there. That helps. We do, like for the boats that are in the show, I made a special door that's got a channel in it, so you can close it down around the pastorelli plate, which has to be heated in the glory hole. And the pastorelli is attached to the rolling yoke, so instead of carrying a big heavy metal plate all day and burning your arms up, you just hook it up to the rolling yoke and you can let go of it and roll it in. So those little things help the work develop.
Yeah, brilliant. Susan, did you want to add something?
When Mark was mentioning being responsible for, having assistance and it forcing you to work ahead of really what's like going on in your brain because they need to keep busy. I really understand that, and as a result, had mixed feelings about having an assistant. you know, I do enjoy working in isolation and taking my time with concepts and doing the trial and error at my own pace. However, having an assistant and being, I guess, responsible for that assistant keeps me moving faster. So I kind of have mixed feelings about, you know, being an isolated artist or working with an assistant. Pros and cons.
Thank you, Susan. Maybe Sibylla, would you care to say anything about
Yes, so I mean, I would say about myself that I really enjoy being by myself in my studio, and that doesn't mean that I'm hiding or that I don't reflect on anything what's going out on outside, but I do believe it's very important as an artist to find kind of longer times of solitude, and it's very rewarding and sometimes frightening, but I think it's super necessary for self-contemplation and also to find your own core and your and kind of gain insight. So the other thing, I never in my life had an assistant, because I would feel like, I mean, I enjoy so much my process, and if I would have an assistant, I would feel that I would miss out on so many things which are happening in between. So I can't even imagine. I'm sometimes afraid, and that's more connected to the question before, when I get older, I'm afraid that I'm not able anymore to carry heavy stuff around. So I'm thinking more about this option, you know, that at one point I may have to work with an assistant, but if I don't have to, I really would choose to work by myself. Well, and a lot of the work I do is it's actually about the solitude, and especially the pieces in the exhibition right now, they're both really connected to this idea.
Thank you, Sibylla. Would anybody else like to add anything?
This is Cappy. I'd like to just say that it's interesting that most of us seem to be kind of on the solitary side of making, but I'm so grateful for the community aspect of, because I spend so much time by myself, and yet there's this incredibly wonderful community that I have access to. So I'm just glad that that there is a big teamwork aspect to Glass. And of course, some of the things that I need to do my work, I can't do. So I depend on other glass makers to make, you know, vessels for me or whatever. But anyway, so it is very interesting that this particular group of artists, most of us are, you know, more loners.
No, that sounds so negative.
It's been kind of interesting during COVID. I've felt like my life hasn't really, I mean, it's changed in so many ways, but on the day-to-day, it's like, oh, I'm still by myself in my studio every day, and it's this weird twilight zone of normalcy and totally crazy. But I feel like I'm maybe able to handle it a lot more than, you know, my friends who are really social beings that kind of have to be involved and go to work, a real, a job where you're kind of interacting more with people. So I'm grateful for that.
Me too.
Thank you, April. Would anybody else like to add to that, or should we move on to the next question? Okay, let's move on to the next question. Blown, cast, flame worked, wheel cut, reverse painted. There's so many ways in which you can work with the medium, and you are all so different in how you work with the medium. What led you to this method of working with glass? What do you do when you need to look beyond the method to create a piece of art? So when your method of working with glass does not get you the result that you need, how do you handle that? What do you do? I'd like to throw this question out to Kathleen Elliott first, if I may.
Yes, thank you. Sure. Yeah, I was in the midst of a career in organizational development, and a friend who had done scientific glasswork had a workbench in his garage and introduced me to flame working. I think one of the most significant advantages to flame working is that, unlike glass blowing in a hot shop, the equipment is small and easily accessible. So I took up bead making and had a small desk in a corner of the family room for a few years. I think that accessibility enabled me to actually take up glass. I'm not sure I would have if I had started with glass blowing, because I never had to rent time in a studio. I got really obsessed and could work on it every day. I think that also enabled me to learn really quickly. When I want to make large pieces not conducive to flame working, I ask friends to help. I find the glass world to be amazingly collaborative, and the artists are really willing to share techniques and knowledge and help each other out. So I've worked over the years with several artists on the West Coast. I make drawings, we talk them through, they make the glass components for me, and then I finish up my pieces. So I've always been able to find people to help me.
Thank you, Kathleen. The glass community, from what I have seen of it, is a very sharing community. It's impressive. Jason, were you raising your hand?
Yeah, I was just going to say, fundamentally, when we come up with an idea that works outside of something that we're more than comfortable with, we just learn it. And to touch on Cappy's comment, Kathleen's comment about the community being so open with their techniques and ideas. Jennifer and I were just trying to play around with Pat Tavere, and she emailed, oh gosh, now I'm blanking on her name, Kiki's daughter, and that's yeah. So we just shot an email and trial and error. We lost so much along the way, but it's like for us, working outside of something, when we had an idea and a drive, you just learn it, and so
it allows you to be a continual learner. Would anybody else like to address this question?
I talked a little bit about why I do flame working, but Mark and the other half of the we in the that Mark was talking about would be me. So we work together, and we kind of do what I would call kind of a hybrid flame working. So he does a lot of sculpting, blown sculpting. He blows the birds that are in my pieces in the show, and so we've developed kind of like a hybrid thing. So the torch and the hot chop. So if something's too large for me to make on the torch, then it makes sense, even if it's very small, to use a glory hole and do it that way, which is kind of crazy, but also really works for us.
Thank you, Kari. Christina, was there something that you wanted to add?
Well, I came from a self-taught ceramic background, and I just came up against a wall in doing ceramics because I was pit firing. I wasn't using color, and I got to the point where I really wanted to incorporate color into my pieces, and with clay, glazes just seemed so strident and on the surface, and I decided to take a class because Corning's not very far away from me. I took a class with Carmen and in glass casting, and I just learned really quickly that glass could do all the same things that clay could with the addition of transmitting light. And it was so hard to learn because you know, when you're learning by yourself and you don't go to school to learn how to use glass, you have to be kind of a private detective to figure out where you're going to get your materials and your tools and everything. So for a long time, my pieces weren't very well made because there was a lot of trial and error. But
thank you, Christina. Well, your pieces are beautiful now. They're
thank you.
Fantastic. Anyone else with Suzanne?
Hi. Yeah. Just like hearing everyone talk about the techniques, I think that there's something, because there's so many different things you can do with glass and so many avenues you can take it down and so many different techniques, that it's like, yes, somebody is doing it out there, but yeah, and we are a really tightly knit community, and you can email people and you can get some answers, but kind of regardless, there's going to be a lot of problem solving yourself and a lot of experimentation. And I think like it depends on your personality, but I think a lot of us get really addicted to that. Like there's this really addictive quality to problem solving and to getting really immersed in these different techniques. And it can also be dangerous. You know, like I find myself getting so immersed in the technique that I've completely lost sight of the image. Like I'm just so addicted to this problem solving and like the mechanics of the glass that it's like it doesn't even matter what it is anymore. So it's like a real challenge to maintain your eye on the content while still being so heavily immersed in technique.
I'd like to add to that, just that I feel like as glassblowers sometimes and glass artists, sometimes we get so kind of addicted to the technique and to the material that we forget that maybe everything doesn't need to be out of glass. So I think everyone on this panel does amazing things with glass and also incorporating other materials, because a lot of times I have to stop myself and say, why am I making this out of glass? Does this particular part of this piece need to be glass? It doesn't always need to be glass. I think that opening that that area of using multiple materials is often something that people forget about, but it's a nice thing to do.
Absolutely. So intention versus spontaneity. Let's talk a little bit about that. How do these concepts relate to you in your work? Does glass making require you to use one more than another? Maybe we could start with Jenny Pullman on this one. Jenny, would you like to say something about intention versus spontaneity?
Thank you, Denise. Yes. I think everyone who works in the hot shop understands the delicate balance between intention and spontaneity. It'd be difficult to sustain a hot shop practice if we didn't. So April referenced the dance, which most people see between the teammates on the hot shop floor, but there's the dance between your vision, your aesthetic vision, and your skill level. There's the dance between your location of where you work and your desired outcome. So just to put it from our perspective, Sabrina and I, we blow glass at a public access facility, a local art center. And we do that because our work comprises assemblage of a lot of materials outside of the glass hot shop. And by being in that hot shop, we blow about 30 to 50 days a year. So to prepare for the hot glass time, we schedule time and then we prep in advance with to be pragmatic for our energy use and of course our out-of-pocket cost. But as everyone who works in the hot shop knows, you need your body working and your mind focused. And at any point along the way, your mind could lose focus, whether it's from an internal source or an external source. So when Sabrina and I walk into the hot shop, we may find that the best laid plans unravel because perhaps the furnace was charged the night before when it wasn't supposed to be. So when we enter a hot shop environment, we have great intention, we have plans B and C, but at the same time, we yield to spontaneity whenever it calls for. And without that malleability, as I said, we wouldn't be able to sustain our practice. And then another place where spontaneity can be a real friend is, regardless of your drawings or the form that you have in mind, you may see something that the glass is trying to show you in its curve or bend in the moment. And we find that if we move with that, we oftentimes advance our form beyond something we had drawn initially.
Yeah, thank you. Those are principles that I guess you can take into your everyday life as well. Those lessons that you learn in the hot shop, they certainly could be applied.
It's been said that glass is a metaphor for life. So there you have it.
There you have it. Would anybody else like to say something about intention versus spontaneity? Kathleen?
Yeah, I think in hot glass techniques, a high degree of skill is required to make objects as intended. You know, glass gets molten and soft. Gravity's at play. We have to manage the heat. It just takes a great deal of skill to make precise objects in glass. In my case, in terms of just raw technical traditional flame working skills, I'm actually not very skilled compared to other flame workers such as, you might know, Roger Paramore, Cesare Tofolo, Robert Mickelson, Janice Miltenberger. These are people who have really top-notch technical skills. And I figured out enough skills to make the type of work that I want to make. I see my art making as a dance, like Jenny was talking about, that I always have an idea that I'm aiming to accomplish. Sometimes it goes as planned, and other times something new shows up that I hadn't envisioned, and I let the material take the lead in those moments. There are happy surprises, and occasionally pieces just go in the trash. So it's a dance.
It's a beautiful thing, though, to let the piece guide you when you do that.
Yeah.
Would anybody else like to say something about it? Carmen? Oh, hang on. You need to unmute yourself. There you go.
Sorry. I think what Kathleen's saying is absolutely true. You know, we're doing all this skill building and trying to learn all these things that all the time. And I feel like, you know, I think I've been working with glass for 24 years maybe. And I feel like just now that I've built this kind of this amount of knowledge and handy, knowing my hands and knowing that I can finally get a product that I want after 24 years, you know, seeing it in my head and being able to produce it sometimes. And I think that's something that's really interesting, especially with everything that's happening in the world today, that this idea that we have this skill that no one else can take away from us because we've worked so hard and so long for it. And that type of skill can give you such self-confidence because you can always carry it with you. And with everything that's happening in the world today and all the underserved youth, it just makes it more and more clear to me that we need to outreach these kind of feelings and skills to other people, somehow reach out and give that gift to other people as well. And that's hard because I think a lot of us are, as we were talking earlier, a little bit more solitary or a little more introverted. But just sorry, maybe that's a little off topic.
I was just wondering, you know, how do you define skill? What does it really mean? Because you can develop your own skill.
Is that to me?
I don't know. Also to Kathleen, because when you were talking about that, you know, you're not so have the skills like other flame workers, but you maybe develop your own skill. What's maybe more important in the bigger picture? I don't know.
Yeah, I think so. I think a large degree of skill is being able to say what I want to say with my work. As long as I'm doing that, that's enough skill. So, but I'm also distinguishing that from just technical skill, like to make a really precise goblet, that's a skill. That's hard to do. So I'm kind of distinguishing those two aspects of skill.
But I would say, Kathleen, that if I can't see you wanting to really make a really nice goblet. Really, would you? I mean, you know, you've gone so far to make these, and I think all of us would kind of giggle when you say that you're not as skilled as these, because in everyone else's eyes, you know, you're incredibly skilled. So, but I think as maybe, yeah, skill, I agree that skill is to make what you see, what you can envision. And then if you can, you know, that makes to me more sense.
Yeah, me too. I pursue the skills to be able to say what I want to say in my work. So no, you won't likely in my lifetime be seeing me making traditional goblets.
I think that talking about skill, one of the things that Mark and I will talk about sometimes is that you have this form that you're going for, and you work really hard to get to that that skill to really do it, and then sometimes you're so good at making it that you suck all the life out of what you have done. So you have to, as you become more skilled, there's another level of difficulty, and that is dealing with your skill and pulling it back so that you don't take all the life out of it, if that makes any sense. We're so good now that we just have to
That's good. That's a good point, though.
You use the word spontaneity. I don't see an artist on this panel that's spontaneous. I mean, I can see them hitting a wall and having to reinterpret something or to adjust or to be flexible. But spontaneity to me kind of points at this kind of just throwing stuff to the wind and letting whatever happens happen. I think everyone here that I see has a plan and an intent, and it may go off the rails somewhere and end up somewhere else, but I don't see it as really being spontaneous.
The way I think I really relate to this too, because at a certain point, once your work can get too tight, you know, and so somehow or other it does lose some of its life, and so it's kind of a dance between skill and I don't know if it's spontaneity, but it's some kind of freshness when you don't know what you're doing is there. That sometimes I love work when I'm just starting something, because there's it can sometimes look quite crude, but it's got a lot of juice. Yeah.
My engraving mentor, Yerji Hartzba, always talked about how children were his favorite teachers, and his favorite engraving was made by I think she was 5 years old, and it was a really abstract little mark on a clear piece of glass, and it was a portrait of cow and strawberries, and of course it wasn't representative, but there was something about the life of the spontaneity that you do end up killing with maybe a more experienced hand. I find that every single piece I make, I really try to make it a little bit more looser and a lot more expressive, and it just seems to get tighter and tighter. So it's definitely in the cold shop and cold process, it's something that I'm always striving for and still trying for.
Thank you, April. Well, I'd like to end this discussion with one final question. And I'd like to pose this question to everyone on the panel. If you could celebrate one thing about glass and how it relates to your art making, what would that one thing be? So let's start with Sabrina. Would you like to take the lead?
Okay, sure. I think what just popped off my head, and it's not that I'm the most social person or anything, but what I like the most about where I'm at and what I do are the community around me, the people who are showing work or makers, and that's it for me. I would say community. That's what I treasure the most.
Thank you.
That's it.
Jenny, how about you? One thing that you could celebrate about glass.
I would like to reference what one of my fellow artists on the panel referenced, was that after 30 years, I find glass is a material that continues to challenge, humble, and reward me.
That's why you stick with it. Thanks. Thanks.
Thanks.
Tina, would you like to?
Yeah, I think for me, one of the favorite aspects of glass is the color. How I think that's what attracted to me. I was bronze caster, and with the pieces that I made here, it just the color, the way color comes through the material, is one of my favorite things about the glass material.
Thank you, Tina. Kari?
I would have to go with community as well.
Thank you. Kathy?
You know, I had it all figured out ahead of time, and I was going to say, it's funny. So I was all on the, colored light, but then the first thing that popped up was the people. So there you go. I'm split.
Okay, you can have two things. April?
I think the kind of endless possibility. It seems like there's always something to be discovered with glass. That's my favorite thing about it.
Shelley, how about you?
I think that I love the fact that it's so transformative, like both with light optically, and then also can immediately put me in a better mood when I start working with it.
That's terrific. Mark?
I was going to say salability, but I think I'm going to change it to plasticity. The ability for it to be malleable and manipulated.
How about you, Jason?
I think when you asked me the question earlier, I said community, and now I think I changed it to humbling. It just keeps me in check. It reminds me constantly that like I don't know a damn thing about glass or any of this or life or anything, and I mean, it comes down to like we could find the perfect process to think we execute something, and then somebody else humbles you in a second and has a completely different reaction to it. So I'd say it's humbling.
Kathleen?
I think my favorite aspect of glass is the beautiful translucency.
Susan?
And me?
Yes.
Yeah. For me, glass embraces the feminine ideals of sensuality in a seductive but unforgiving material, and it offers conflicting messages of comfort and expectation in that work. I like its complexity.
Suzanne, how about you?
It's the community for me. I haven't been doing this for that long, and I feel like a pinball. Like it just keeps going. It's crazy.
Thank you, Dean.
It's a really hard question to pick one, and I relate to what everybody's saying in different ways. But I have to say that glass has really given me some fantastic special relationships with artists and students and teachers and galleries and collectors. And as a material, it's just such a good material to translate the figure because it's so like us.
Sibylla?
For me, it's also like like for Kathleen, it's a translucency and also the transparency, the possibility of layering, you know, of transparent skins where you just can add more and more and create a kind of depth. What's really, for me, super fascinating. And of course, community. That's always good and important.
Thank you. Daniel? Dan?
Hi. I'm just scribbling here. Something keeps drawing me to go to the studio every day. So it's best illustrated by during COVID. I hate that people are sick and dying and losing jobs, but I love the pace of COVID from studio to home, studio to home. I don't have to get on a plane. There's practically no temptation. So to do anything but go to work. And I can't answer the question about what it is, but I can only say it is. Like I go every day and just do something.
Thank you. How about you, Carmen?
I would say versatility, that it just has the potential to do anything. It's limitless, the possibilities. So, and I think that's totally clear in everyone's work that's here today.
Can I say something to Carmen's and backtrack?
Yes, absolutely.
So Carmen, I see that intense optimism about this material that aggravates me to no end.
Oh yeah, it makes me cry all the time.
Yeah, so it's the material itself is aggravating, and I must like the aggravation.
A little bit of masochism, Dan.
There you go.
It's the piece of sand, Dan.
Christina Bockwell, how about you? One thing that you'd like to celebrate about glass?
I like the surprise element. I like that no matter what my intentions are for a piece, that the glass has an unpredictability factor. So I can plan, I can have this intention to have a piece come out a certain way, but it always surprises me. And it allows me to kind of keep my mind as a kid, you know, like it makes it more playful for me that I'm not always completely in control. So I like that quality a lot. I'm always surprised.
Thank you, Christina. Thank you, everyone. What a great discussion.